From air to land, on the second day of a military drill, the Taiwanese army is simulating a scenario where its cities are under attack. This amid ongoing concerns of a Chinese invasion. Democracies in the Indo-Pacific region are coming together. Australia and Japan sign a historic defense deal in face of the communist regime's threat. A Chinese real estate company has defaulted on loans, and it's not Evergrande. Property developer Shimao Group missed a $100 million payment. 4 people in California die of opioid overdose within an hour. Police suspect fentanyl is to blame, a drug primarily sourced from China. And another pregnant woman has lost her unborn baby after hospitals in one Chinese city turned her away. That's as humanitarian concerns circle the city's strict lockdown. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. On Thursday, the Taiwanese army simulated a war scenario involving urban warfare confrontation. It was the second day of a 3-day military drill. The exercises took place in a mock town built for military simulations. The area is designed to mimic urban environments. There are neighborhoods and alleys similar to those you see in Taiwanese cities. An instructor of the exercises says they are training because the enemy will show no mercy.
We also train under difficult conditions, including rainy days, scorching sun, and extreme cold. We make no distinction between men and women. We have to train under harsh conditions because the enemy will show us no mercy.
During the drill, one team was tasked with attacking a city, while another team was tasked with defending it. The soldiers had lasers attached to their weapons with blank cartridges for training purposes. Members of the media were allowed to watch the exercises. This is to showcase that Taiwan is combat ready. The exercises come amid rising tensions with Beijing. The Chinese military is dispatching an increasing number of warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Is Beijing really going to attack Taiwan? A top U.S. Admiral Phil Davidson said last year that Beijing could invade Taiwan in the next 6 years. Davidson was the commander for the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command at the time. In the middle of last year, a leading military magazine in China published an article. It described 3 steps to gain control of Taiwan. It involves air, maritime, and land battles. Australia and Japan have just signed a landmark defense deal. It allows troops from both countries to freely enter each other's territory for drills. The Indo-Pacific-based treaty comes as Communist China works to expand its military deterrence in the region.
The treaty is the latest move to strengthen ties between democracies in the Indo-Pacific region, an effort that looks to counter the Chinese Communist Party's rising military power.
Japan is our closest partner in Asia, as demonstrated by our special strategic partnership, Australia's only such partnership. An equal partnership of shared trust between 2 great democracies committed to the rule of law, human rights, free trade, and a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the agreement opens a new chapter and will, for the first time, set out a framework for cooperation between the 2 countries' defense forces. Japan has the strongest economy and most advanced technology out of all China's neighbors. It's also the most important U.S. partner in the region. The U.S., Japan, Australia, and India stepped up their efforts in countering China last year. That's when they carried out their first joint military drills. The new Australia-Japan treaty echoes a similar agreement between the U.S. and Japan, albeit with more restrictions. That deal allows American troops to enter U.S. military bases in Japan without getting screened first. The treaty was signed back in the 60s. Unlike the new variation, it was not aimed at countering Communist China.
Evergrande and Kaiser are not the only Chinese real estate developers that defaulted recently. According to a letter by lender China Credit Trust, property developer Shimao Group defaulted on a loan after missing a payment to investors. China Credit Trust sent the letter to investors. It said that Shimao had paid a portion of the loan, but it failed to pay the remaining $100 million. The The missing payment meant the loan is now in default. Shimao Group is about $10 billion in debt to local and offshore investors. The company is one of China's largest property debt insurers. Shimao develops residential, hotel, office, and commercial properties. It is China's 14th biggest developer by contracted sales. The company's default brings larger worries. That's because Shimao was once considered a more reliable debt borrower. It could be the latest sign of distress in China's property sector. Shimao's default comes only a few weeks after Evergrande and Kaisa Group officially defaulted. Dozens of nearly completed buildings owned by Chinese real estate developer Evergrande are getting demolished. Altogether, they cover millions of square feet. Some residents living nearby said that they are sad to see them go. NTD's Don Ma has more.
39 Evergrande high-rises, stretching 4.6 million square feet, are set to be flattened. The structures will be torn down before next week. This is according to a local order from authorities in China's Henan province. Evergrande revealed Monday that it had received the order late December. The notice dubbed the buildings illegal constructions and said they violated environmental rules. But how are nearby locals reacting to the news?
I think it's a shame. It's a real shame. So much money was spent, such a waste of manpower and resources. They're all completely finished. It's a shame they have to be demolished. The government could have saved it for some other use. I saw a lot of the people here. All of them are saying that they don't want them demolished. They could be left for some other use.
China's Evergrande is the world's most indebted developer. The real estate giant has been struggling to repay more than $300 billion in liabilities, on top of nearly $20 billion of offshore debt to investors. Last month, ratings agency Fitch Ratings officially declared that Evergrande went into default. The developer was put into the restricted default category. This designation means the company had defaulted but had not yet entered into bankruptcy filing or other processes that would stop its operations. Don Ma, NTD News.
The world's top thermal coal supplier, Indonesia, has decided to ban exports in January amid domestic shortages. An Indonesian government statement from last Saturday ordered all core exporters to reserve their stockpiles. As the biggest buyer of Indonesian coal, China is expected to suffer. Asian countries, including China, India, Japan, and South Korea, together bought over 70% of Indonesia's coal exports last year. And China bought the most. This is according to the world's leading commodity data analytics, Kepler. Chinese official statistics say that 60% of China's coal imports for the first 11 months last year came from Indonesia. Taiwanese economist Wu Jialong says the ban will cause international coal prices to surge and in turn hurt China. Wu says China's electricity and steel industries will have to bear the cost. Most of eastern China suffered from power outages last year. Factories were shut down, traffic lights went out, and electricity prices rose. Many believe this had to do with Beijing's decision to ban Australian coal imports. It's now the middle of winter in most of China, and the situation doesn't seem to get any better. To make sure the skies are blue during the Winter Olympics, Beijing ordered many provinces to use electricity for heating instead of coal. This makes power shortages even worse. To simulate power generation, some local authorities raised the prices of electricity by up to 70% during peak hours of power consumption. Is China a safe bet for investing? Some on the Wall Street say yes. For one, Citibank is trying to grow its presence in China, while the CEO of investment bank JP Morgan sought to get to Hong Kong as soon as possible, and did so last November. But the bond king is warning about the risks of investing in China. Jeffrey Gundlach, founder of Double Line Capital, says China is uninvestable in his opinion. He told Yahoo Finance that he's never invested in China long or short because he doesn't trust their data. He also doesn't trust the relationship between the U.S. and China, and he says investments in China could even be confiscated. The Chinese regime has been clamping down on some of its biggest companies. Just this Wednesday, authorities slapped fines on 3 tech firms, Alibaba, Tencent, and video sharing site Bilibili, saying they violated antitrust laws. The clampdowns are putting pressure on Chinese stocks. One index that tracks mid and large cap Chinese stocks dropped about 50% last year. The other factor is the lineup of U.S. sanctions against Chinese companies. The penalties led to an $80 billion loss for Chinese industry moguls just last year. That's 1/4 of their wealth. To put that in perspective, the sum equals the total GDP of the state of West Virginia. A Southern California city saw 4 opioid overdose-related deaths throughout the city, all occurring within 1 hour. Police say investigators are ongoing, but the drug is suspected to be fentanyl. China is the primary source of fentanyl in the illicit market of the U.S. NTD's Cynthia Tsai has the details.
4 people reportedly overdosed on opioids and died within an hour of each other in Anaheim, California on Monday. Police say they suspect fentanyl or fentanyl-tainted drugs to have caused the deaths. The first was at 11:40 a.m. Officers responded to a deceased female in a motel room in the 800 block of South Beach Boulevard. Then at about 12:05 p.m., officers responded to a deceased male in the 1700 block of South State College Boulevard.
About an hour after the first call, we received the third call, which was of 3 male adults that were out on the street, or as the sidewalk, as it were, at the intersection of Anaheim and Water. Officers arrived on scene. 2 of those adult male victims were pronounced deceased on scene. There was a third that was administered Narcan.
He was transported to the hospital in critical condition.
Now, in the sense of any foul play, meaning that this was anything other than a purposeful ingestion of drugs by the victim who then overdosed in turn, no, there's nothing to indicate that any of these people were forced to take or ingest the drugs.
Carringer says investigations are still ongoing, but police suspect the deaths were opioid overdoses based on the type of drug equipment found at the scenes of the deaths.
I'm not talking about a pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl that does have a legitimate medical application. I'm talking about illicit fentanyl that's sold on the street. It didn't exist, until a number of years ago. But it does seem that fentanyl has found its way, whether purposely or by accident, into a variety of other drugs that you wouldn't expect to see it in. And I think that's what's causing some other accidental exposures and overdoses.
Since 2013, China has been the primary source of fentanyl exports to the U.S. illicit drug market through firms with special licenses granted by the Chinese Communist Party.
We're living in a day and age where a lot of these drugs are tainted with substances that you are not expecting to come in contact with, and it can be fatal.
Both the Obama and Trump administrations had previously pressured the CCP to crack down on the production and exports of the drug. Cynthia Kai, NTD News, California.
In an earlier report, we covered one Xi'an resident's tragic loss. The woman had been 8 months pregnant when she lost her unborn child. That's after a local hospital refused to treat her due to pandemic regulations. Now, reports say another pregnant woman has lost her child due to local lockdown restrictions. The mother-to-be posted her story online Wednesday, saying she lost her baby because multiple hospitals refused to take her in, despite being in critical condition. She first noticed she was bleeding at around 10 a.m. that morning. Her husband immediately called 120, China's version of dialing 911 for emergency services in the U.S. But he couldn't get through. Her community then connected her with local police officers, who sent her to a provincial hospital. But the hospital turned her away, despite her contact tracing health code indicating she had not come into contact with the infection. That's because she lives in an area labeled high risk for virus exposure. Based on that hospital suggestion, the woman sought help from another local health facility, but was refused yet again. This time she was turned away because her health code indicated she hadn't had contact with the virus. And the smaller hospital was only accepting patients who had been exposed. The woman's husband called several more clinics, but none would accept her. The couple was forced to return home. On their way at around 3 p.m., the woman started bleeding again. Later that day, they finally found a private maternity hospital that would treat her, but it was too late. Sharing her story online, the woman wrote, "That day was my nightmare. That day I lost heart for the city I once loved." She also voiced sympathy and understanding for the mother who had lost her child days ago, describing how that woman was forced to wait outside a hospital for over 2 hours while bleeding, all because her most recent virus test results had expired 4 hours prior. She miscarried while waiting. The first incident fueled outrage online. Since then, local health officials have apologized for their negligence and vowed to rectify the situation. But the second mother's similar tragedy struck just days later. Amid one of China's strictest ever lockdown policies, a man in the city of Xi'an was forced to confess on camera. His crime, sneaking out to buy food for his family. As part of Beijing's zero-COVID policy, residents in Xi'an are banned from leaving their homes, even to buy groceries. That's amid a recent pandemic surge there. In the video, a community service volunteer first introduced himself. Then, gesturing to a man standing behind him, the volunteer accused him of escaping quarantine. He went on to call the man's purpose for violating the ban unclear. The man was then ordered to read an apology on camera, saying, quote, "I realized my behaviors were ridiculous." He explained there isn't much food left at home and had wanted to get out to buy some. He also pointed out it's been difficult for locals to purchase goods online. At that point, the volunteer steps up. He states that vegetables were just delivered to over 2,000 households in the community, emphasizing the goods come, quote, "with loving care from our government." The volunteer questioned the man about whether he, too, had received the produce. The man just nodded without saying anything. The volunteer then criticized the man's escape, mimicking a typical Chinese communist tactic. Facing the camera, he yelled,
国家不会同意，政府不会同意，我们工作者更不会同意。
He threatened to send the man to the police if he attempted to leave his home again. The video has since appeared online, attracting a number of comments. One comment, seemingly laced with sarcasm, reads, "One great thing about the Chinese Communist Party is that it gives dregs of society the opportunity to do evil." Another internet user likened the volunteer's actions and approach to tactics used during China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s. Writing, "A scene from the Cultural Revolution has reappeared, a struggle session and confessions of guilt." The 10-year Cultural Revolution was a major political upheaval in China, led by former Communist Party leader Mao Zedong. It sought to purge traditional culture and thinking and targeted those who stood against Maoism and the ideas of Chinese communism. Another comment left on the video appears to express further concern, saying a society without human rights is truly terrible. China's pandemic control measures are ramping up, and workers are disinfecting virtually everything, even the streets. In Xi'an City, disinfectant liquid was sprayed along the highway, but the effort caused a number of major accidents. One of them was caught on camera. Officials seemingly did not take the weather into account when issuing the order, as intense winter conditions caused the cleaning solution to freeze. The slick layer of ice on the road made it near impossible for drivers to brake in case of emergency. The Twitter user who posted the video says multiple drivers have crashed as a result. But officials don't appear swayed by the accidents. Instead, they've praised and publicized the road cleansing on TV as a win for pandemic prevention. On Thursday, state-run broadcaster CCTV aired footage of trucks spraying disinfectant through empty streets. The footage was captured in the central Chinese city of Yuzhou. According to official data, 55 confirmed cases of COVID-19 were reported there, though NTD cannot independently verify that figure. As part of China, Hong Kong is also implementing the so-called zero-COVID policy. That means strict quarantine rules, isolation of positive cases, community lockdowns, and travel restrictions. Let's take an inside look at how the measures can take a serious toll on people, physically, financially, and emotionally. Will Ripley reports.
In zero-COVID Hong Kong, pandemic protocols have paralyzed this once busy travel hub. The arrival process that used to take minutes now drags on for hours. Mandatory testing at the airport, waiting hours for the results. The lucky ones test negative and spend up to 21 days in self-paid hotel quarantine. Daryl Chan is not one of the lucky ones.
I'd had both of my jabs. I'd been boosted. I didn't ever think that I would be actually test positive on arrival.
13 hours after landing in Hong Kong, Chan was in an ambulance. His luggage left at the airport. He tested positive for the Omicron variant. Even without symptoms, his minimum hospital stay is nearly a month.
Do you worry about your mental health as these days turn into weeks?
Yeah, absolutely, because I've never been in a situation like this before.
In general, there is increased sense of isolation, anxiety, and in some severe cases, even post-traumatic stress.
Hong Kong psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Wong says longer quarantines can be more traumatic.
And then we have a lot of changes between the 7 days and the 14 days and the 21 days, and that was when people reported more stress, especially with a longer period of quarantine.
Daryl's day begins with a wake-up jingle.
Attention, please.
He takes his own vitals. Calls and messages with friends and family help pass the time.
Social media has really helped, actually. Definitely makes you feel less alone.
One of his greatest struggles, sharing a room and a bathroom with two strangers.
But I think what has definitely impacted me the most so far is the feeling of just, not having the freedom and regressing into almost feeling like you're back at school, with controlled wake up and bedtimes, not being able to control what you can eat.
Hospital meals often consist of mystery meat. The bigger mystery, Chan's release date. He's supposed to start a new job, a new life in Hong Kong.
What's the worst part of this?
I think the worst part is not knowing when I'll be able to get out.
For now, all he can do is wait. From his hospital bed, freedom feels like a lifetime away.
Hong Kong is announcing new restrictions in response to the latest pandemic situation. Measures include banning many international flights, prohibiting indoor dining after 6 p.m., and holding thousands of cruise ship passengers for virus testing. Here are the details.
Hong Kong authorities announced on Wednesday that passenger flights from 8 countries will be banned for 2 weeks starting Sunday, January 9th. The 8 countries are the U.S., the UK, Australia, Canada, France, India, Pakistan, and the Philippines.
In other words, we will ban all civil aircraft from these countries from landing in Hong Kong. And we will also ban people who have stayed in these 8 countries from boarding any passenger flights coming into Hong Kong.
To prevent the spread of the virus, the government is banning indoor dining after 6 p.m., starting Friday. They are also closing sports centers, bars, clubs, museums, and other venues for at least 2 weeks. Other measures Hong Kong has taken over the past week include locking down residential buildings and mass testing. Hong Kong reported 38 new COVID cases on Wednesday, most of them in people who had been outside the city.
We're yet to see a 5th wave outbreak in the community yet, but we're on the verge. We might arrive at that phase in the next 10 or 20 hours. So in response to the latest pandemic situation, we dare not neglect it.
Also on Wednesday, authorities held 2,500 passengers on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship docked in Hong Kong. All passengers will undergo virus testing. Officials had ordered the ship to cut short its journey and return to port early. That's because 9 passengers on the ship were linked to a recent cluster of Omicron cases.
China news may seem chaotic with so much information swirling in the news. We want to offer you a look at the bigger picture to help you make sense of the details. If you haven't already, use the link in the description box down below and subscribe to our China in Focus newsletter. On top of offering the highlights of what's going on, it also gives the much-needed context behind those stories. And once in a while, you'll also get a peek into some behind-the-scenes content to see what we're up to. Every Friday morning, the latest will land in your inbox. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.